There is a specific kind of fear that visits quiet people in the evening. Not a loud fear, not a panic, just a slow, persistent question that surfaces when the house is still and the night is long. What if this life I've built, this calm, this silence, this careful distance from noise, is the mistake I won't fully see until it's too late? Some people carry this question for years. They live in a way that genuinely suits them. Small routines, a home that feels like shelter, a social life deliberately kept narrow. 1 or 2 people maybe, or none at all for long stretches. And it works. On most days, it truly works. But then something shifts. A birthday passes. A family gathering happens. Suddenly they are surrounded by lives being lived loudly nearby. Someone shares photos from a group trip. Laughing faces, full tables. The image of a life well lived, at least according to everything they were taught to recognize as such. And the question returns, quieter than a whisper, but heavier than it looks. Am I choosing wrong without knowing it? This isn't regret. Not yet. And that's what makes it so unsettling. It's the ghost of a future regret, a haunting that arrives in advance. For people who think deeply, who feel carefully, who examine their own lives with unusual honesty, this ghost is particularly persistent. You're not grieving what you've lost. You're terrified of grieving what you chose. There's a specific cruelty in that distinction. It means you can be completely at peace in your life today, genuinely at peace, not pretending, and still lie awake wondering if today's peace is tomorrow's sorrow. It means the comfort you feel right now isn't enough to silence the question. Because the question isn't about now, it's about then. About the older version of you, sitting in a quiet room, looking back. And you cannot know yet what that person will feel. Here's the part almost no one explains about this particular fear. It doesn't visit people who are careless with their lives. It doesn't haunt people who live on autopilot, never stopping to wonder if their choices are truly their own. This fear specifically targets the thoughtful, the self-aware, the people who care, perhaps more than most, about living with intention. In a strange way, the very fact that you carry this question is evidence that you are not sleepwalking through your life. The people who never ask whether they're living correctly are rarely the ones living most consciously. You are asking. That already means something. But the fear has a voice. And that voice borrows its language from everywhere. From the relative who says warmly and without malice, "You should get out more. Life is short." From the cultural script that equates a full life with a full calendar. Weddings attended, trips taken, group photos accumulated, dinner tables loud with voices. From the quiet, devastating phrase repeated in movies, in memoirs, in deathbed scenes. In the end, what matters is the people around you. That phrase deserves some careful attention, because it sounds like wisdom, and in certain forms, it is. But it also does something subtle and damaging to people whose nature leads them towards solitude. It collapses a complex truth into a single image, a crowded room, a surrounded self. And if that image isn't yours, if your deepest moments of feeling alive have happened alone, or in the quiet company of one person who understood without needing to be explained to, then that phrase doesn't just make you feel different, it makes you feel like you're doing life incorrectly. What no one tells you is that this phrase was never meant as a universal prescription. It was born from a particular kind of life, a particular kind of person, someone for whom connection happens easily and naturally, someone who draws energy from rooms full of people, someone for whom the word together has always meant more bodies, more voices, more presence. But that is not the only way a human being is built. And applying one person's truth to every person's life isn't wisdom, it's a category error. Jung understood something essential about this. He wrote about what he called the psychological type, the idea that people are not simply more or less social, but fundamentally oriented in different directions. For the introvert, in Jung's framework, the inner world is not a retreat from real life. It is real life. It's where meaning is made, where experience becomes something that actually belongs to you. Jung would say, that when an inward person tries to measure their life against outward metrics, social volume, group belonging, visibility, they are measuring depth with the wrong instrument. A thermometer cannot tell you how much something weighs, and this matters more than it might seem at first, because the fear of quiet life regret is often fueled by exactly this confusion. We take the metrics designed for one type of person and apply them to another. We measure a life built for depth using tools designed to measure breadth. And then we wonder why it always comes up short. If we go one layer deeper, something important appears. The fear isn't only about the future, it's also about the present judgment of others. It's the awareness, conscious or not, that the life you're living doesn't look the way a life is supposed to look, according to the people around you. And for someone sensitive, someone who already feels slightly outside the social mainstream, that awareness carries real weight. It's not vanity. It's the very human need to feel that your choices make sense to the world you live in. When that validation is absent, the mind fills the silence with doubt. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe the version of me that chose quiet is the version that chose wrong. And yet the fear persists for another reason too, one that's worth looking at directly. Some quiet lives are genuinely chosen, freely, consciously, because solitude is where that person breathes, and some quiet lives are built from fear, from old wounds that made connection feel too dangerous to risk, from rejection that happened early enough to leave a permanent imprint, from a self-protection strategy that started as reasonable and slowly became a wall. The fear of future regret often knows this. It touches that nerve on purpose. But what if you're not choosing solitude? What if you're hiding? I've sat with that question myself. There was a period when my life was very small, not unhappily small. There were books, routines, a few people I trusted. But I remember wondering, during certain evenings, whether I was building a life or constructing an avoidance. The honest answer was, sometimes both, sometimes one more than the other. What helped wasn't answering the question with certainty, it was learning to ask a different one. Not, am I hiding? But, what would I look like if I were truly free, not free from people, but free from fear? That question changed the texture of everything, because here's what becomes visible when you look closely. There is a real difference between a quiet life chosen from wholeness and a quiet life chosen from wounds. And the difference isn't about how many people you see on a Friday night. It's about whether the quiet you live in feels like peace or like protection from something you haven't healed yet. Both can look identical from the outside. Both can even feel similar, day to day. But one has a kind of settledness in it, a groundedness, a sense of, this is mine, and I chose it, and I am not running from anything. The other has a faint hum of anxiety underneath it, a background tension, a feeling that the quiet is holding something at bay. Jung would gently remind us here that awareness itself is the beginning of freedom. You don't have to resolve the question completely. You just have to be honest enough to feel the difference. This is where most people completely misunderstand the fear of quiet life regret. They assume the solution is to live more loudly, to say yes more, to add people, events, noise, and hope that in doing so, the fear disappears. But that's not how it works. Because regret, at its deepest level, isn't about what you did or didn't do. It's about whether you lived in alignment with who you actually were. There are people who filled every weekend for 40 years. Parties, gatherings, group trips, social obligations carefully met. And at the end, they looked back and felt a strange emptiness. Not because the people weren't real, but because so much of it was performance. So much of it was saying yes when every quiet part of them wanted to stay home. Their regret wasn't that they spent too much time alone. Their regret was that they never once trusted themselves enough to do so. And then there is the other kind of regret, the one that actually belongs to people like you. It doesn't come from having lived quietly. It comes from having lived quietly while believing, the entire time, that something was wrong with you for doing so. It comes from spending decades apologizing, internally or out loud, for the size and shape of the life that felt most true. That is the regret worth avoiding, not the quiet itself, but the shame that follows it everywhere. The regret you fear, the image of an old self, alone and sorry, is a real possibility worth examining. But it is not the only possibility, and it is not even the most likely one for someone built the way you are. Consider for a moment the other version, the version where you spend the next 20 years overriding your own nature, saying yes out of fear, building a social life that looks right but feels hollow, exhausting yourself maintaining connections that were never truly nourishing. That too is a form of regret. It just arrives wearing different clothes. Here is a distinction worth holding carefully. A quiet life is not the same as an empty life. Emptiness is the absence of meaning. Quietness is the absence of noise. These are not the same thing, and confusing them is one of the most common sources of unnecessary suffering for people like you. A life can be deeply quiet and extraordinarily full of thought, of attention, of the kind of presence that only becomes possible when you stop performing for an audience. And a life can be loud, crowded, and socially successful while feeling profoundly hollow at its center. Volume is not depth. Presence is not connection. Attendance is not belonging. Jung wrote that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. He wasn't talking about quantity, he was talking about quality. One real meeting, one conversation where something true is exchanged, can carry more meaning than 100 polite interactions that leave both people unchanged. You may have had fewer of those meetings than others, but if they were real, they count in full. They do not count less because there were fewer of them. There is also a distinction worth making between solitude and isolation. Solitude is chosen. It has an open door. Isolation is a closing, a gradual retreat from everything, including the things that once gave you life. A quiet life built on solitude can still include warmth, love, laughter, genuine connection, just in smaller, more intentional doses. The question isn't how many people are in your life. The question is whether the people who are there actually see you, and whether you let them. And there's something else worth naming here. Isolation rarely announces itself. It tends to arrive slowly, dressed as preference. First, you skip one gathering because you genuinely don't have the energy. That's solitude. Then you skip another, and slowly the circle of your life grows smaller. Not by design, but by default. The people you might have let in never quite got the chance. Not because you didn't want connection, but because the distance became familiar before you noticed it had become permanent. This is the honest question that the fear of regret is actually pointing to. Not, did you live loudly enough? But did you leave the door open? So what does it look like, in practice, to tend a quiet life without letting it calcify into something fearful? It starts with a small, honest question, asked regularly, without judgment. Does this silence feel like rest, or does it feel like hiding? And then listening, genuinely listening, to what comes up. Some weeks, the answer will be rest. Some weeks, it will be something more uncomfortable. Both answers are useful. Neither one is a verdict. It also means staying gently open, not to the noise you don't need, but to the specific forms of connection that actually nourish you. Not the obligatory gatherings, not the performances, but the quiet conversations. The one friend who doesn't require you to be more than you are. The letter written and received. The shared silence that means more than most words. A quiet life doesn't have to mean a life sealed shut. It can mean a life with a few very specific, very real openings, carefully chosen, deeply valued. It also means being honest about what you're protecting and whether that protection is still necessary. Some of the walls that keep the noise out were built during genuinely difficult times. They were wise and necessary then. But walls built in one season don't always need to stand forever. You are allowed to examine them, to decide quietly and without drama which ones still serve you and which ones have simply become habit. That examination isn't a betrayal of your solitude, it's a deepening of it. And it means, perhaps most importantly, learning to trust your own testimony about your own experience. You are the one who knows what it feels like to come home after a long social event and finally exhale. You are the one who knows what it feels like to have a full weekend alone and emerge from it clearer, softer, more yourself. That testimony is real data. It counts. It is not a symptom to be corrected. Imagine for a moment the older version of you. Not the version full of regret, the other one. The one who spent years learning to trust their own nature, who stopped apologizing for the size and shape of their life, who found 2 or 3 people who were truly, deeply right and let those relationships be enough without guilt, who built a home that felt like a genuine sanctuary, who spent evenings in the kind of silence that restores rather than empties, who created things, wrote, thought, built, made, in the spaciousness that only solitude can provide, who, in the end, did not measure their life against someone else's calendar and find it lacking, who measured it against their own values, their own depth, their own moments of genuine aliveness, and found it sufficient, more than sufficient. That version of you doesn't look back with regret. That version of you looks back and thinks, I was brave enough to live like myself. The fear of regret will probably visit again. It doesn't disappear permanently, but each time it arrives, you can meet it differently, not with dread, but with honest curiosity. Is this fear pointing to something real that needs attention? Or is it just the old script, running again, trying to convince me that my nature is a mistake? That question, asked with patience and without judgment, is one of the most important things you can do with your one quiet life. Jung believed that the greatest tragedy was not to become who you truly were, not to fail at someone else's version of a full life, but to fail at your own. The quiet life you're building, carefully, thoughtfully, sometimes fearfully, is not automatically a wrong turn. It may be, in fact, the most honest thing you've ever done. And honesty, lived consistently over a lifetime, has a way of becoming something that looks remarkably like peace. And if this conversation has touched something in you, if you felt the weight of building a life that is truly yours, while carrying the fear of what others might think, or what a future self might say, then you already know this isn't simple to resolve in a single sitting, because beneath the fear of regret lives something even quieter and more persistent. The question of whether you are allowed to need what you actually need, whether your way of loving, connecting, and resting in the world is valid, not just functional, but genuinely worthy. And beneath even that question lives another one, softer but no less important. What happens when the quiet life you've chosen begins to feel not just peaceful, but perhaps a little too safe? When solitude stops being a choice and starts feeling like the only option left? That line, the one between a life thoughtfully kept small and a life that has slowly closed in on itself, is one of the most important things a quiet person can learn to see. And it's exactly where the next conversation begins. Alone, together. A quiet corner of the internet for people who choose solitude over half-hearted connections.